the Internet of Things. That's why we're all here, and the industrial Internet of Things. I want to focus on that. But the very, very first thing I want to talk about is the definition, because as I've facilitated a number of these projects with Convetit and worked on a number of large projects with my clients, one of the first questions that comes up is, what is this? Is it just a bit of hype? Is there really an industrial Internet of Things? What are we talking about? And it's a good question because there's a long, long history of interconnecting smart devices, PLCs, sensors, motor controllers, you name it, on the plant floor back to PLCs. That's been going on, or not back to PLCs, but back to all sorts of servers and points. So the idea of interconnection of smart devices is not new, and we've been doing that for 50-odd years now. Particularly if you've ever worked in the oil and gas SCADA industry, it's been even longer than that. So what's new? I mean, that's a good question. And to my mind, what's really happened in the last few years, and the reason why we have a whole new term, is this rate of integration and the complexity and the range of interconnectivity has just exploded. Whereas 5 or 10 years ago, I could sketch together a pretty quick drawing of most of the communications coming in and out of a plant floor and on the plant floor. Today, that's not possible. The amount of interconnection is just completely different. Next slide. And I think this is really, really well said in a Convetit engagement that I was involved with a little while ago by a guy named Steve Venema, who was responsible at Boeing for a lot of their IIoT. And what Steve said was that IIoT is the new label for something that's actually been developing for decades, the growing interconnectivity of cyber devices which control physical systems. And the key word here is interconnectivity and growing interconnectivity. What Dr. Venema was really pointing out is we've been doing it for a long time, but this isn't so much a game changer as it's notice that the game has changed. We've moved away from just a few point-to-point connections on the plant floor to a massive mesh of information that we're sharing at all levels. And so it's really a different way of looking at it. And that's the key. This is a new way of looking at an old problem. We've always had data in our manufacturing systems, but it's tended to be locked down there. And what we're doing today is rethinking the way that industry integrates all that data buried down there in the manufacturing processes. And it's not just data from sensors and valves and motor controllers. It's also data on things like test results, analytics, asset management information, maintenance information. There's a lot of data down there that has traditionally not been available to the company as a whole. And that can be a bit of a problem because it limits the things that the company can do. So at this point, let's just take a little survey of what you think you could do with better access to the data on your plant floors and in your systems. And they're better information all around. So how do you think your where in your manufacturing chain do you think that manufacturing IoT or industrial IoT can unlock the most value for you? So click on the box that you think would be the best value for you. And Linda, let us know when you think we've got lots of surveys in.
Sure, we are getting almost there. All right. Okay, it should share the results now.
Okay, excellent. All right, so improved safety is sort of at the bottom of the list, and improved reliability is at the top of the list. And that's exactly what I'd expect today. If we, in fact, if we head to the next slide, when we talk about let's see, one more slide here. Yes, that's perfect. Thanks. When most of the IIoT projects I'm involved on, they're really around trying to improve reliability and reduce downtime. That's nearly always the reason somebody comes to me with an IIoT project. And that, I believe, is giving us real benefits. But in the long run, I see IIoT as a platform for continuous improvement right across the entire plant. It's more than just a way to improve the operations and reliability of the plant, but actually a way of being able to get better quality, better information, and information going both ways, not just down or up from the plant floor, but actually back to the plant. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But I want to give you a specific example. This came from Corey Nation, who's a senior project engineer at Bridgestone, and it came up during one of the Convetit seminars, engagements we did looking at the best practices for IIoT deployments. And he stated, and you can read this, I'm currently implementing a sensor on hydraulic crimping machines to detect the force supplied when assembling tubular automotive components. Operators and engineers will have line of sight to the throughput and quality of the assembly. Major automotive customers are requesting this to diagnose and repair quality defects. Now, what's interesting about this is 5 years ago, the operators would have view of this sort of information. The engineers could go get it by building a report in the data historian. But the upstream customers, i.e. the major automotive manufacturers, would never have information about what was actually and how something was built. So if they were starting to experience component failures, they could just feed that information, that the fact that they were having component failures, back to their suppliers, but really not be able to correlate that to what might be going wrong. And so this is a great example of how you end up with the opportunity to feed information from the plant floor far beyond your company to make your company and its product better. Now, it's not without risks. And it's important that we understand the risks. So I'm going to do another survey here. We hear lots of reasons when I'm on projects on what are the roadblocks. And so I'd like to find out what you see the biggest roadblock to your company before it successfully adopts IIoT capabilities. So have a look at these 5 and think of, select the one that matters to you, the ones that stops projects or prevents projects or limits the capabilities of a project. What's the roadblock?
Okay, we have over half voted so far. We'll let a couple more come in before we close the poll. Okay, and I'll share the results.
All right, let's see those results. There, we've got the gremlins in the back busy counting the okay, I think we've got a hanging Chad somewhere.
Hey, Eric. Let me reshare the results. Hold on one second.
Perfect.
Are they coming up yet?
Not on my screen. It's still got the poll open.
Okay, one second.
Let's just hope the November poll goes a little smoother.
Well, I'm sharing the results again, but I can talk you through it as well. So by far and away, the biggest answer with 43% of the votes is security concerns. Next, with 29% of the votes, is challenges improving ROI for IIoT projects. Then the other 3 are, the last 3 in the list: challenges and analysis, lack of skills, and company culture.
Perfect. Yes. All right. That's excellent. And those actually very much line up to what I'm going to talk about next. So thank you, everybody. And it's good to see that the experiences that you guys are having out in the field are matching what we're seeing here when we bring our experts together or when I'm out in the field myself. So I highlighted, without knowing the results of the poll, three things that I think are major, major risks right now, and I think they tie in well. The first one is a model that I see over and over, and I don't particularly like, is people sort of build the IIoT infrastructure and hope to get some value out of it. That might be great for baseball stadiums. If you build it, they'll come. But it's not, in my opinion, a model for successful IIoT rollouts. It's a very nice thing to have a good platform, and I'll talk more about that later. But really, we want to make sure we're driving business value, and I think that's absolutely critical. The second item that I think I see go wrong, and this goes back to one of the points that people said about analytics and the inability, is it's easy to get too much data and no information or too little information. With an IoT project, you can get massive data overload. And we all know that data on its own is pretty useless. In fact, it's a distraction. So the key thing that you want to be doing as you design an IIoT implementation is deriving value and getting the data actually working for you. And that takes skills in analytics, but also skills in seeing what your goal is. Why are we doing this? It's not just to collect data. And then the last thing that I wanted to highlight as a risk is security, and all of us today clearly think security is pretty darn important. The obvious issues is the interconnected nature. I mean, we read in the paper about all sorts of problems, the power grid being attacked in Ukraine, pharmaceutical companies being attacked in Europe, power grid here over and over, or water companies being attacked here. Lots and lots of examples of how the interconnectedness of a manufacturing system can expose the company to external attacks. That's the obvious problem, but it's not the only security problem that needs to be considered when you're designing an IoT system. The other thing that poor security design will end up doing is getting you into a problem where it reduces the trustworthiness of your data. In other words, you end up with a garbage in, garbage out scenario. I was recently made aware of a situation in Australia where people were tampering with recordings and logs from the plant floor to specifically give a misleading view of what was going on. So without some sort of security design to ensure the integrity of the data going into your system, you will get bad data or bad results out. And so integrity of your data throughout its life, when it gets collected, when it gets transmitted, when it gets processed and analyzed, and when it gets presented, is absolutely critical. And that doesn't just happen with a firewall. And then the last thing is poor data management strategy will end up leaking or could leak your corporate critical secrets. If you just have a big pipe on your plant floor, it's really, really hard to decide or manage exactly what information you might be sharing, say, to the people upstream if you're a company that supplies to other companies or to even your customers. You don't want to have your own version of WikiLeaks going on. But it's also really important to understand that information can be going back from your customers. And I'll give you a specific example. When we were putting together at the company that I used to own, Techy Security, which is now part of Belden, we made little industrial firewalls. Now, we had fairly good monitoring of how our systems were, or our products were manufactured on our assembly systems in Europe. That we had good information, but what we didn't know is how our customers were actually using our products, and so that we could feed that back to manufacturing, how they were breaking our products and why they were thinking they were failing or where they thought their problems. So we started to collect data on the products themselves about use, how these little firewalls were being used, how they were configured, what their conditions were. And we started to record the information that we found that the maintenance and support engineers were going and manually collecting when they went actually out to the plant floor. But this was really illustrative for two reasons. One, it points out that the data doesn't always flow from the plant floor up. In this case, it was flowing from our customers back to our engineering and manufacturing. The second thing, though, is that we were large international oil companies and control systems companies, and they are very paranoid about, and rightfully so, about what information we were collecting. So right up front in the design, we had to be very clear with what information and make that demonstratable so that an engineer could come along and see exactly what information we were collecting in very human readable form. And I mean, this went right down to the design of the way we transferred files and what was in the files. We used, for those of you who are familiar with it, the XML markup language, so that an engineer or a security person or even a manager could scan a file and see exactly what information we collected, and then give them the ability to say yes or no if that information was allowed. This again doesn't happen by accident. It was a very, very focused effort to try and understand the nature of the information and make it transparent on what information would and wouldn't be transferred in our IIoT project. So you can see that the point I want to make here is you need to design security in from the start. And it is not just firewalls. Even though I used to sell them, it's not just firewalls. So at this point, I want to talk about the best practices. What have I seen on the processes that I've been involved in, and what have I heard the experts at Convetit share as they describe their experiences out on the plant floor and in manufacturing? Well, the very first one that I think is absolutely critical.
There's a little bit of static on your line. I don't know if something changed with your audio.
Okay, let me just see. Thank you very much. Try that. How's that sound? Any better?
Unfortunately not.
Okay. Alrighty. Let me see. I'll try one more thing.
Sure.
How's that sound? Is it any better or worse?
Yep, that's better. Thank you.
Alrighty. Okay, I think we just had a little hardware failure on my mic. All right, if everybody can hear me now, we'll move back on to the best practices. And again, I want to be clear that this isn't just my experience, but it's also the experience I've taken away from dozens and dozens of experts in Convetit engagements that I've been involved on. People that work for the companies and the people that do the consulting, which has been really valuable to me. So the very first item, it's absolutely critical to understand that this is not just the Chief Information Officer's project. Do not mistake IIoT as something that IT does. First of all, it's really important to involve the entire company both in the deployment and in the benefits. If you're pulling data out of a PLC or out of a maintenance system down on the plant floor that is owned and operated by somebody in operations, you really need to have them on board, and you need to show that it's going to benefit them. In fact, you have to show everybody in the entire chain how it's going to make their job better and really involve them so that they can both talk about how they're going to benefit and what their concerns are. So this is absolutely critical. You also need to get senior management and finance support. And I've seen projects that I've watched roll out from management and finance, sort of a overall, this is the way we're going to do things. And I think that is secondary to getting senior management and finance to support projects. Good example is one of the major aerospace companies who, when it came to IIoT projects, senior management, IT, and finance gave people in the business units, people that were very entrepreneurial and very fast-moving, the tools to roll out IIoT, not the requirement that they roll it out. And this included even things like ways of properly requesting financing and demonstrating ROI, so that the finance group could process and use that information efficiently and really get on board. I think one of the things that we all know is it's easy for people on the plant floor to have a struggle when they're trying to justify their projects. And so if a company wants to have successful IIoT projects, I think it's really important that the finance group really make it clear how those type of projects should be demonstrated for return on investment, for request for capital, etc. Again, I want to make it really clear, while there's lots of techy parts in this, this is not a wiring problem. It's not an IT focus. And the successful deployments I've seen have staff with skills in analytics. Again, we're going to get a lot of data. Now let's get some information out of it. And that's not easy. Skills in joint IT, OT operations. You need somebody who can talk convincingly both and understand the operations side of the business and the IT side of the business, so that they can act as a bridge. And things can go really wrong if you just jam an IT solution into an OT environment. Quite a few years ago, I was involved in fixing a problem where somebody decided at head office to be collecting plant floor data at a major US pulp and paper company. They wanted it for an expert systems project they were doing to analyze the manufacturing of paper. When they, what they did is they basically logged into the control systems at one of the East Coast plants and loaded a little data collector application into the equipment. Now, in theory, that wasn't a problem, but in practice, what that did was overload these distributed control systems so that they no longer properly pulled the PLCs doing motor control. And on sort of a semi-random, actually it was intervals of every 5 minutes, but not every 5 minutes, they would shut down the plant. Now, this is a great way to kill an IIoT project. The lack of understanding by the head office team on the constraints on the plant floor really killed that entire project and actually cost that company millions of dollars. And lastly, you need somebody with security architecture design experience. Now, you don't have to have staff that are experts on all these, but you do need somebody that can at least manage the experts. And then afterwards, remember, this project is going to not just be set up and then left alone. It's going to evolve for years and years. No IIoT project is absolutely static. It's something that is a continuous, ongoing effort. So you need some either in-house or a very, very close consultant long-term. But I suggest in-house that has at least the ability to specify what he wants out of, or she wants out of analytics, out of joint IIoT operations, and out of security design, and make sure that you're getting what you want and what is right for your company. And lastly, no, sorry, not lastly, far from it. Very important, it's easy to get caught up in the how. The techie parts of this are fun. I'm a techie. I love talking about protocols and technologies and middleware, but that is rarely the issue. You want to drive business value, and you want to focus on the why. Why are we collecting and moving this data? Why are we analyzing this data? How is it going to give business value? If you can't answer that question, if you can't say, this is going to make the company better for this specific reason, then I would reconsider the project. I think it's absolutely critical, and it's not good enough just to say it'll make us a better company or it'll make us more reliable. The more you can define what the business value is, the more likely your project will be a success. Now, that's not always easy, so the next step, pilot and then scale, is one that I highly recommend. I've seen a lot of very nice, successful small projects work this way, and then they keep growing. And so this has some real benefits if you start small and then expand out. One of them is, in any IIoT project, you'll typically get some real naysayers. Often people that have been there a long time, often people, I'm sorry to say it even though I'm a plant floor engineer, but some of my colleagues on the plant floor do not want or do not see the reason they should support this. If you can get some small wins up front that really benefit them, then suddenly your most ardent opponents become your biggest supporters. And I'll give you some examples of this, and I'll give you one that really struck home for me. It was around instrumentation, and this actually brings on one more point that I want to say that I didn't actually put a slide together, is it's not always just hauling the data out of the data historian, or it is often the ability to collect data that is on the plant floor but isn't really part of the process control system. And a good example is data that is coming off of test rigs or analysis rigs, information that ends up on somebody's clipboard or a spreadsheet. And a good example, if any of you have ever worked in the turbine manufacturing business, in other words, turbines that are used in jet engines, or in my experience, primarily where I've been involved in the pipeline business and the oil and gas gas pipelines as prime movers for moving gas down a pipeline or onshore from a wellhead out in the ocean. And so these large turbines, the blades have to be very carefully balanced, each blade, so that you don't get vibration. And so once a turbine system is built, you end up on the turbine doing a lot of tests for vibrations, and then analyzing these frequencies, and then modifying the blades according to specific formulas. And this is typically done with a test rig, and it takes a $250,000 turbine blade or turbine fan component out of your inventory and off to the side for a considerable amount of time, resulting in a lot of waste and inefficiency while you tune this. And it has a lot of opportunity, in my experience, for transcription errors and mistakes, because it's often instrumentation and testing equipment being fit into spreadsheets, etc., etc. I was recently made aware of a company that started to automate this so that this information was being fed out of the test harnesses immediately into the corporate system, so that people could look at this, so that there was no transcription errors, and so that it actually, the amount of changes was actually starting to become part of the inventory flow. Now, why I mention this is this was not a particularly big project. This was really about instrumenting an existing test rig. But that simple project got clear wins that really helped people understand why they would want to support something like this, including the test engineers. And then the other thing that I think is really, really important is, and I've alluded to this before, is designing security into the IIoT project from the start. Now, there are a number of good standards around this, not particularly on IoT, but particularly with respect to plant floor security. A good example is the standards produced by the ISA and IEC called the 62443 standards. And they talk about how you want to design security systems into zones across your plant, both zones in a layered point of view, often following what we call the Purdue model, but also within a layer, how you break up the operations into zones so that you can control traffic. And if you have a problem, be it a virus or unapproved access or information you're worried about leaking in one zone, it doesn't spread across the entire plant floor. And so a good example of how not to do this was a configure attack that happened in a power company in South America a few years ago. And was widely reported, where Confictor moved from substation to substation to substation to substation, right through the whole organization. As they patched and cleaned up that piece of malware in one area, it was showing up in others. You want to have the ability to have a company that's not the Titanic. One hole in the boat doesn't sink the whole thing. And at the same time, you want to design in automated failback features. Often what I see is people will put together a IIoT project as sort of an experiment. And it's often sort of back of the napkin, a little bit of duct tape, and it'll all work. And it's providing some interesting information, but it's not designed with reliability or failure in mind. And then 6 months later, the company has now become absolutely dependent on that information. It is critical for the operations of the company. And so now you have a critical information flow based on a hacked together solution for absolutely collecting that data and transporting it. So it's important to understand, as you're designing it, what the failures might result in and designing accordingly so that you build back your failback or failover position as appropriate. And again, don't be surprised if some of the information gets used in ways you don't expect. And this also ties into allowing tolerance for short-term failures. If you're building an IIoT system, try to make sure that it doesn't, the short-term failures don't result in catastrophic failure for your company. And finally, you want monitoring built into the plan from the start. Too often I see people build systems, use firewalls, which again I'm a big fan of, I used to sell them, and then never really have a way to monitor it. And that is very much like putting locks in your house, but forgetting, and maybe even putting in a burglar alarm system, but never turning it on. I think this could all be really well wrapped up by a talk that Vimal Kapoor, the president of Honeywell, gave at the Honeywell Users Group in Phoenix in June. And he said, IIoT is an evolution. It's moving legacy systems into the new age of technology to take advantage of everything new technology and connectivity have to bring. And I think that nails it. You know, this is an evolution. We've got communication systems, we've got data, we've got all sorts of things that we've had for decades. But what we're doing is bringing all that together and evolving to the point where we can actually share that information beyond just the plant floor to other parts of the business process that need it. And also bringing in all the information that the business has and the customer has back to the plant floor to be able to make a better product. So to wrap this up, first of all, I think it's absolutely critical to involve the whole company. Right along the entire chain that you see your information flowing. The people on the plant floor, the people in the intermediate areas, the people in analytics, the people in IT, the people in finance, the people who are going to use the information. All of those people have to be both involved in the deployment, understanding the benefits, and having an opportunity to talk about their concerns. You want to drive business value. You don't want to make this a technology project. You don't want to focus on the how. You want to focus on the why. And to do that, you really need to have people on your staff with the right skills. Again, there's lots of consultants out there to help you, and those are very good, but it's good to have a few people on your staff that at least know the right questions and understand the technologies and the issues and the designs so that they can both communicate with the consultants and support the project after all the consultants have left. And start out small. The best projects I've seen have been small projects that grow over time. And finally, design that security in from the start. Don't figure you can bolt it on later with some add-on technology. It really has to be architected into the data and the data transfers and the data classification, and all those things need to be planned up front. So at this point, I'm going to pass this on to Tom, and he's going to talk a little bit more about the information we get about IIoT.
Thanks, Eric. I really appreciate that. And some questions have started to come in. So just a reminder to continue to put your questions in the question chat box. And after Tom's comments, we'll make sure we have time for those. So by way of quick introduction to Tom, he's passionate about working collaboratively to help advance corporate innovation timelines. Tom has 20 years of technology transformation, operational leadership, and strategic advisory experience. Before founding Convetit, Tom was the Director of Insights and Strategy at Oracle, as well as a Director at Avaya. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom.
Great, thanks, Linda. Thank you, Eric. It's great to see how we can take opportunities like this to feature some of our most successful facilitators, and Eric's done some great work on our platform. And I don't want to take for granted that people know what we do, so I'll just do a real high level. What we help convene advisory boards on a variety of subjects for clients, and then they can engage these advisory boards either ongoingly or in these engagements where they go very deep and narrow over a few days. And so Eric here has facilitated a few of those. He's a certified facilitator on our platform and clearly a subject matter expert in the domain of IoT, which, to the point of today, is the sort of fastest growing subject out there that companies are scratching their head on. So I'd say about 60% of all the work that we do on our platform helping companies engage advisory boards has to do with IoT. And so what I thought I would do is just share a few of the sort of repeat concerns and issues, which I think you'll find mirror a lot of what Eric just talked about and also what the polls supported. So it's good to see when things match up, because it means we actually know what we're talking about rather than hoping or imagining that a market need that doesn't exist. Here's what we've learned is that there are certain reasons that are causing consternation or delay or frictions in rolling out IoT. And Eric's already talked about some of these, but I'll just layer on some context that we hear a lot of folks out there trying to figure out the why. And I think, Eric, you said it well. This is really where you got to start. Senior management needs to be in line with why they're doing this. What do they really hope to achieve? And so getting the right leadership to the table to build advocacy. And so we at Convetit, we put them through a process together online, talking to some of these IoT experts that have successfully deployed real ROI generating projects, very relevant to the area that they're working in, their industry, to help them build confidence about what types of projects produce real value. So you can imagine 20 experts coming together that have sort of been there, done that, seen the pitfalls of deployments, where they're engaged over a 4 or 5 day period, working with executive teams, helping them understand where real value exists. It's pretty powerful. The next obvious question around people is, what skills might I need? And I think you mentioned one, Eric, around security, architecture, design. But what folks need to understand is that we live in a world today where even if the skills aren't in-house, they're readily available. So we'll talk more about in a second about how you can leverage those skills that sit outside your walls. But clearly, the people part needs to get figured out first. Once why is well understood, we see a lot of companies asking about what to do and balancing this on-site versus off-site, the uptime of having data at the shop floor, the security that ensures as well, versus pulling that data off into a central environment or giving access from an off-site location into my data can cause a lot of consternation for a lot of companies. So getting that confidence that you're architected edge versus central correctly, and working on a reference architecture that people back and support and balances, right, the stakeholders involved. So a lot of this has to do with getting advocacy and getting people behind things, and people are properly incentivized to ensure that their interests are met. Meaning, the shop floor, the person at the OT, you might say, the operating technology layer, they're thinking about, hey, I don't want to put what I've got that's working at risk. So their voice needs to be heard. And so at the same time, you have the visionary saying, hey, we could really innovate a lot more if we had better access to this data or more control over it at a central location. And that voice is equally important. So, creating these online engagements where we're bringing external experts to help give voice to those people, right? To allow your teams to come on and engage directly with experts, but also get feedback of how those problems get solved in the real world. What is the reference architecture that's relevant given your current frictions? And getting that external viewpoint helps validate, but also create a healthy balance, so people can, take maybe their internal politics aside and say, you know what, this expert is making a lot of sense, or that concern that Jim is always talking about must be real because now I'm hearing it from other people externally. And it does wonderful things to get people action ready. The third area, in which was, I think, at the top of the list, continues to be at the top of the list. I think we did a project not too long ago where we brought some external experts together to ask them what are some of the biggest issues around advancing IoT at their locations. And security resoundingly was the top. I think we saw that in today's poll as well. So, what I think security reflects is really how to do it. So you have, the people really answering the why, the process is about what to do. And then the technology is really about what tools and how am I going to implement this and actually build it. I think this is one of the biggest, clearly we already said it's the biggest concern out there. I think it's the biggest concern for a couple reasons. One, because it involves people. It's not just a program office can't come up with that idea. To Eric's point, it can't be an afterthought. It really needs to be baked into the root of it. So when you're architecting is when it needs to be considered. And then the other tricky thing about it is that there's a lot of noise out there about different approaches. And so really understanding that technology, a lot of companies, as Eric suggested, don't have this skill set in-house. So you can imagine being able to expose your architectural plans, or at least the big moving parts, to an exclusive group of experts that we've screened and vetted for any conflict of interest. We put them under NDA, and you come together and vet your security plans prior to deployment. Can be really powerful in building that level of confidence that you've thought of everything. And if you can't stand up to an expert vetting around your security, well, it just begs, you definitely want to solve this on the front end, not on the back end, right? And so getting that confidence on the front end, even if it does mean, taking some chances a little bit by exposing your thinking to others, letting them critique you. It's a common, anytime architects build a building, they always have this phase, the French call it a charrette, where you bring folks around, you have them look at the plan and you say, guys, what am I forgetting here? And security is one of those things because it's an ever-changing landscape. You really do need to bring a diverse group of people around your plans. And a guy like Eric can facilitate such an activity. Moving on, I just wanted to share with you what a real life Fortune 500 client did on our platform using our methodology, leveraging a facilitator much like Eric. And what we did here is they were looking for a reference architecture. IoT, they had an idea of what they wanted to achieve and why they wanted to do it, but they weren't really certain about this whole OT versus IT and what's the right balance and managing data out at the edge. So it's sort of that second use case example that I was talking about before. You can see here what they did is they brought 16 engineers, researchers, and consultants together to explore this problem with them. Day one, they talked about the current landscape. What's out there? Give us some examples of what's working, what's not working. Let's sort of get our heads around what our options are. Day two, they looked at sort of what issues manifest. So where are the bodies buried across people, process, technology, understanding the future edge management architectures, And so that gave us a list of sort of understanding what's working, what's not. So then day 3, we're able to ask ourselves what needs to be true about a reference architecture to fulfill these, the specific needs. And then day 4, then what's left is we're prioritizing almost a roadmap for what, how to move to that reference architecture. And so you can see in just 4 or 5 days here, this client learned more than had they gone out and done, hired a bunch of consultants, hundreds of thousands of dollars 6 months later. We advanced their thinking in just a couple of weeks. They had it documented. They had it in a beautiful report as well. They had us produce the report, 2 versions of the report, one that went to their CEO, one that went to more of a thorough one to their technical and operations teams. But point is, folks, is that these wonderments don't need to be out there very long. Convetit's a terrific process. I built this process out of my experience at Oracle, where I saw companies struggling for too long, wondering about the why and the what and the how. I thought, boy, let's create a methodology that can bring the right experts together in a process that, much like a charrette that I mentioned earlier, it's a healthy vetting. It's a healthy balance of minds, deep dialogue, systems thinking that happens quite rapidly. So think of us when you're confronted with some of these challenges. Let's help you get past them fast. Leverage guys like Eric to help you do it.
Great, thanks, Tom. I really appreciate that. So now we're going to open it up to some Q&A. There's been a couple of questions that have come through the chat window. So again, just a reminder, submit your questions through that question chat window. So Eric, this one's probably for you. And what capabilities do you suggest in terms of cybersecurity that can be introduced to enhance what is currently in the market?
Can you read that question again? I'm not entirely sure what the question is.
Sure. It seems to me that the person's trying to get to, are there any future enhancements for cybersecurity? What capabilities would you suggest in terms of cybersecurity that could be introduced to enhance what's currently existing? Or what's the future of cybersecurity as you see it?
Wow. Okay. Yes.
Well, big question.
Yeah, and I think because it is so big, I think what it really focuses on, this question, is the capabilities. And I think you were talking around security architecture design being a key capability. What other forms of capabilities, maybe in-house or maybe even industry-wide, are lacking out there?
One of the things that I see lacking currently is data tends to get transferred right now without context. And certainly without any security context. So, if I can read, or if I can even talk to, say, a PLC and get a particular value out of its registers, there's no information about that typically that says, oh, but this is proprietary information, or this should only be shared with so-and-so. In fact, in most cases, if I can communicate to a device, I can get any darn data I want. But even as you move it, and that's a problem on the plant floor, and that's where you end up using particular tools, because you're not going to replace your controllers. You'll use tools like deep packet inspection firewalls, etc. But as you move the data up into your, call it IIoT cloud, I think the thing that really needs to be done is that it's not just loose data, it has context to it, and it also has security context to it, and I'm starting to see that with a number of sort of middleware products where you can specify not only, hey, where did this data come from and how reliable it is, but who can it be shared with and who can see it. And I think that's the really important thing going forward, is treating not a device as needing secure, but actually a particular blob of data needs certain security capabilities, and it needs to be as we call it in the security business, end to end. How do we make sure that a piece of information that's mission critical to a company and is treated as mission critical down on the plant floor and given high security also has high security when I view it on my cell phone, and those are the things that really need to be. It still needs evolution, but there are definitely moves in the whole middleware market towards that sort of contextual data security.
Thanks, Eric. Another question around security. This definitely is a hot topic, but if security is the biggest issue in advancing IoT at my company, how can I address that with other senior leaders?
Well, this is actually, this is going to sound like an infomercial here, but this is where something like the Convetit forum really works, and I've seen this used very successfully in other cases. But trying to pitch a security solution or a security design to senior management can be a real challenge. And it doesn't just revolve around IIoT, it's any components of security. So what I've found is if you can bring together enough experts, A, to come up with a design, but also to question that design. One of the things that I do in one of my other roles is I work with a lot of companies who end up finding themselves on the front of the New York Times because hackers have hacked their product, and they're now they have a consumer product or an industrial product that is now getting some very bad press. And this really applies to any architecture. You want friends to evaluate it, and not the bad guys to evaluate it. Otherwise, you get to hire me to fix that public relations mess. And so I think it's that kind of overview, and I don't know if your question exactly, but it's that kind of ability to A, come up with an architecture that meets your needs for your IoT deployment. I mean, there's no silver bullet in this game. What type of data do you have? Where are you using it? Where are you trying to send it to? What is mission critical and what is nice to have? What is confidential and what is I don't care? But then overlaying that on top of a solution and then vetting that solution so that you can present it to management, and when they say, well, I don't think this will work or I don't think that'll work, you really have answers by experts. So I hope that answers your question, because it's a complicated question.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. One more question around security. How do you avoid shutting down a system for patching while its availability is mission critical?
Oh boy, that one's a fun one. So actually, there's been some really, really good work on patches, and in fact, if you Google my name, Eric Byres, and Google patching, you'll find a bunch of papers that I wrote. I wrote one last year, a couple, actually I guess it's about 2 years ago, specifically on the topic of patching mission-critical systems. In a nutshell, there are really two strategies that are important in patching. One is determining the criticality and urgency of a patch, and then determining an appropriate rollout cycle to the pieces of equipment. AstraZeneca, the pharmaceutical company, did a very nice paper on this as well, where they talked about how when a mission-critical patch comes in, they actually take 30 days to roll it out. They roll it out initially to sacrificial devices, in effect, things in devices in their training system, devices that are part of a redundancy scheme, and then they work it down to what will really hurt us down if it goes down because of a patch, and they would wait 6 to 10 days as they rolled it out between each level of criticality, so that they could see, because sometimes patches hurt you, 2 or 3 days later, not the moment you install them. Sometimes they crash things immediately, and sometimes they just are a requirement to reboot the system. But you really want to have that sort of rollout. So if you Google AstraZeneca patch strategy, ISA, or I can try and see if I can post it somewhere, or if you look up some of my papers on patching, you'll find references to it. So that's one of the ways. The other way is what we call mitigating controls, or what Microsoft calls workarounds when you look at a Microsoft patch notice. And that is, you don't always have to patch right away, but you need to do something right away. I used to have an employee who was responsible for patching at British Telecom on the big heavy-duty routers. Now, just because a router manufacturer like Cisco on some of the big iron says, here's a patch, doesn't mean that a major telco is just going to stuff it into all their routers and all their backbone equipment. It's just not going to happen. They're going to have a very, very controlled rollout. But at the very same time, they would do what they call mitigating controls. That might be specialized firewall rules, that may be a shutting down of certain features that took away the risk that that patch or the lack of the patch exposed. And so you really want in any patch deployment strategy to not just consider the patching, but the alternatives, the compensating controls or mitigations or workarounds, depending on the industry you work on. You can use all three of those terms. But it's what do we do when we can't patch fast? What can we do to get the same or close to the same level of security? Hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks, Eric. We'll have to wrap it up now, but before we leave, I just want to let everybody know we have one of the Convetit engagements that Eric was facilitating on is called the People, Process, and Technology in Industrial Internet of Things. We have a free ebook available. It's about 40 pages, lots of really great detailed information. Usually this report is available for a charge, but we're making it free for attendees of this webinar for the next 24 hours. So I just put the link in the chat window. So if you go to info.convetit.com/IIoT, you can download that report for free. So just again, a thank you to Eric and Tom for speaking and presenting to us today. I hope everybody was able to get something out of it. As a reminder, the recording of this webinar will be available on our blog later today if you would like to listen to it again or forward it to a friend. So thanks again, everyone. And thanks, Eric.
Thank you, Linda.